Dramatic, right? This generation expects constant validation. James said nothing, but his silence felt weighted somehow. Not judgmental, just present. Emily found herself continuing, words spilling out unexpectedly. I pay well, better than well. I provide opportunities people dream about. If someone can't handle the pressure, that's not my fault. But even as she said it, she remembered Diane's trembling hands during their last conversation, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she'd flinched when Emily raised her voice. Almost there, James said gently, pulling up to the building's entrance. Emily gathered her belongings, preparing to plunge back into the performance her career demanded. As James opened her door, she paused. "Thank you," she said, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. Something about his steady gaze made her add, "For listening. Most drivers just want the ride to end." "Most passengers just want to arrive," James replied. "Sometimes the journey matters too." Emily stepped out into the rain, those words following her into the building. Behind her, James Reynolds watched her go, already understanding more about Emily Carter than she understood about herself. The test had begun. The decision point inside the meeting, Emily tried to focus on acquisition terms and profit margins, but her mind kept drifting to the quiet driver with thoughtful eyes. Something about their conversation had unsettled her carefully constructed walls. When her colleague Bradley made a dismissive comment about the parking attendant, Emily surprised herself by saying, "He's just doing his job." Show some respect? Bradley blinked in surprise. So did Emily. 2 hours later, when she emerged from the building, the same black sedan waited. Rain still fell steadily, but James stood beside the car holding an umbrella ready to shield her for the few steps to the door. "You didn't have to wait," Emily said. "I know," James replied simply, opening her door. As they drove back through Seattle's glittering streets, Emily found herself watching the city differently. Each person they passed carried their own complexity, their own story. When had she stopped seeing that? When had people become categories rather than individuals? "Can I ask you something?" Emily said suddenly. "Of course." "Do you think people can change? Really change, not just perform differently?" James considered this carefully. "I think people change when they finally see themselves clearly. The question is whether they're brave enough to look." Emily leaned back against the seat, her reflection ghost-like in the rain-streaked window. She thought about Diane's resignation letter, about the young woman in the rain, about this driver who spoke like a philosopher. "Tomorrow evening," she said as they approached her apartment building. "Same time?" "I'll be here," James promised. As Emily walked to her door, she turned back once. The car remained at the curb, James visible through the windshield. He raised his hand in a small wave. Emily found herself waving back, a gesture so simple and human it made her throat tighten. Inside her apartment, she pulled out her phone and found Diane's number. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Not yet, she thought, not until she understood what she needed to apologize for. The rain continued falling on Seattle, washing the streets clean, and somewhere in the night, a billionaire drove home alone, believing he might have found something rare, someone willing to question themselves. The pattern emerges. Over the next 5 evenings, the black sedan appeared like clockwork outside Crawford Financial Group. Emily found herself leaving work earlier than usual, anticipating the quiet sanctuary of those drives. James never pried, never judged, but somehow his presence created space for Emily to think thoughts she'd suppressed for years. On Tuesday, they encountered a disabled vehicle blocking traffic. Other drivers honked aggressively, but James simply pulled over and helped the stranded motorist push the car to safety. Emily watched through the window, her scheduled dinner reservation ticking away minute by minute. When James returned, rain-soaked and apologetic, she surprised herself. "That was kind of you," she said. "I'm sorry I didn't help." "You're wearing a $700 dress," James replied without irony. "Sometimes the best help is recognizing when others are better positioned to assist." But Emily heard what he didn't say. She could have offered her phone, her contacts, her reassurance. She'd simply sat frozen by the inconvenience. Wednesday brought a different lesson. At a stoplight, a homeless veteran approached cars asking for help. Emily's instinct was to look away, to make herself invisible behind tinted glass. Instead, she watched James roll down his window and hand the man a $20 bill, along with genuine conversation about available veteran services. The unexpected encounter. Rain hammered against the glass towers of downtown Seattle as Emily Carter rushed through the revolving doors of Crawford Financial Group headquarters. Her designer heels clicked urgently against marble floors, while her phone buzzed with the 7th urgent email in 10 minutes. The merger deal was falling apart. Her team was panicking, and now her regular driver had canceled at the last possible moment. "Ms. Carter, your replacement vehicle is waiting outside," the concierge called as she swept past. Emily barely acknowledged him with a nod. Outside, beneath the building's overhanging entrance, a pristine black sedan sat, with engine running. A man stood beside the rear door, dressed simply in dark slacks and a plain jacket. No company logo, no badge, nothing to distinguish him except his unusual calm in the chaos of rush hour. "Finally," Emily muttered, not quite looking at him. "Take me to the Bellingham address. I need to be there in 30 minutes. The man opened the door without comment. Emily slid into the back seat, already typing furiously on her phone. She didn't notice the quality of his watch, briefly visible as he closed her door. She didn't catch the way other drivers seemed to give this particular car extra space. She saw only what she expected to see: hired help, invisible service, someone whose name she'd never need to know. The silent observer, James Reynolds, settled into the driver's seat and adjusted the mirror, not to see the road, but to observe his passenger. He'd built his empire on reading people, on understanding what they revealed when they thought no one important was watching. Tonight's cancellation by Emily's regular driver hadn't been coincidence. James had arranged it the moment his business partner Robert mentioned their potential new investor was notorious for how she treated service staff. "Traffic looks heavy on I-5, James said evenly. "I'll take the surface streets if that's acceptable." Emily glanced up briefly. "Whatever gets me there fastest. I don't have time for delays." Her tone wasn't cruel, just automatic. The voice of someone who'd learned to optimize every interaction, to treat time as the only currency that mattered. James pulled smoothly into traffic, noting how Emily's shoulders remained tensed, how her jaw clenched each time her phone buzzed. They drove in silence for several blocks. The city's evening rush created a strange intimacy in the car, two strangers sharing space while remaining completely separate. James noticed how Emily rubbed her temples periodically, how she'd start to type messages, then delete them, how exhaustion shadowed her carefully maintained professional appearance. "Long day?" he asked quietly. Emily looked up, seeming surprised he'd spoken beyond logistics. "Every day is long. That's the job." "What kind of work do you do?" She hesitated, as if calculating whether conversation with a driver was worth her energy. "Corporate investment, mergers, acquisitions, financial restructuring. You wouldn't find it interesting." "You might be surprised what interests me," James replied mildly. Small revelations. Something in his tone made Emily actually look at him in the rearview mirror. His eyes were thoughtful, intelligent, not the glazed expression of someone simply enduring their shift. "How long have you been driving?" she asked, her own curiosity surprising her. "Years," James answered truthfully. "I've learned a lot about people from this seat." Emily almost smiled. "I imagine you see everything. People probably forget you're there and just exist." "Something like that." They stopped at a red light near Pike Place Market. A young woman stood on the corner holding a cardboard sign, her jacket inadequate against the rain. Emily's hand moved instinctively toward her purse, then stopped. She glanced at the door lock, then at James in the mirror. "She looks cold," James observed neutrally. "There are shelters," Emily said, but her voice carried less certainty than her words. "Systems in place for situations like that." "Systems don't always work," James replied. The light turned green. He drove forward without judgment in his tone, but Emily found herself looking back at the young woman, something uncomfortable stirring in her chest. The cracks begin? To show, 15 minutes later, they approached the Bellingham building where Emily's crucial meeting awaited. Her phone rang. Her assistant, Diane, who'd quit 2 weeks ago via a tersely worded email about toxic work environments and impossible expectations. "What does she want now?" Emily muttered, silencing the call. She caught James's eyes in the mirror and felt compelled to explain. "Former assistant claims I was too demanding, as if excellence doesn't require high standards." "What did she say exactly?" James asked. Emily paused. "That I never listened. That I treated people as tools rather than human beings." She laughed shortly.
"You know a lot about community resources," Emily observed. "I make it my business to know," James replied. "Money matters less than information sometimes. Connection matters most of all." Thursday evening, Emily asked James to stop at a coffee shop. Inside, she ordered her usual complicated espresso drink, then noticed James asked for nothing. "You don't want anything?" she asked. "I'm working," he said simply. Emily frowned. "That seems like an outdated rule. Get something." My treat. For the first time, she saw something flicker in James's expression: amusement, maybe approval. He ordered a simple black coffee. As they waited, Emily found herself studying him more carefully. His jacket was inexpensive but well maintained. His shoes were practical but quality. Everything about him suggested someone who chose simplicity rather than someone who couldn't afford complexity. "You're different from other drivers I've had," Emily said. "How so?" "You seem, I don't know, content. Like this isn't just a job you're enduring until something better comes along." James accepted his coffee from the barista with a warm thank you that made the young woman smile. "Maybe I've already found what I'm looking for." The gala invitation, Friday afternoon. Emily's calendar reminder chimed. Philanthropy Gala tonight, Crawford Foundation event. She'd been dreading it all week. Another evening of performative charity and networking disguised as compassion. As she prepared to leave the office, she impulsively called the number James had given her for scheduling rides. "Reynolds here," his voice came through clear and professional. "It's Emily Carter. I have an event tonight at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. 7 o'clock, I'll be there." Something made her add, It's formal. One of those charity things where rich people congratulate themselves for writing checks. Those events fund important work, James said mildly. The motivation matters less than the impact. Emily arrived home with barely an hour to prepare. She chose a midnight blue gown, elegant but not ostentatious, and found herself wondering what James would think. The thought stopped her cold. Why did she care about a driver's opinion? Because he sees you, a quiet voice answered. Really sees you. The world tilts. James held the car door as Emily emerged from her building, and she caught the brief flicker in his eyes. Appreciation, quickly masked. The drive to the hotel took them through Seattle's most affluent neighborhoods, mansions glowing warmly against the evening sky. Do you ever wonder what it's like? Emily asked suddenly, living in places like these. I imagine it's lonely, James replied. Space without connection is just emptiness with expensive furniture. Emily laughed despite herself. That's actually quite accurate. At the hotel entrance, valets swarmed like well-dressed bees. James pulled to the curb, and as Emily prepared to exit, she hesitated. Will you wait? She asked. These things never last as long as they claim. Of course, the gala was exactly as Emily had predicted. Crystal chandeliers, string quartets, speeches about making differences while caterers served $100 appetizers. She moved through the crowd mechanically, shaking hands, making appropriate responses. Her mind elsewhere. Halfway through dinner, the foundation president stood to make announcements. Before we continue, I want to acknowledge someone whose vision made tonight possible. His generosity and guidance have transformed our mission. Emily barely listened, pushing salmon around her plate. Please join me in welcoming our founder and chairman of the board, James Reynolds. The room erupted in applause. Emily looked up absently, then froze as her world tilted sideways. James Reynolds walked onto the stage from a side entrance. The same James who'd opened her car doors, who'd helped stranded motorists, who'd quoted philosophy while navigating traffic. But now, he wore an immaculately tailored tuxedo, moving with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of powerful people. Emily's wineglass trembled in her hand. She set it down carefully, feeling hundreds of eyes in the room, but seeing only one pair his, scanning the crowd until they found her. Their gazes locked across the glittering space, and James's expression held something complex. Apology, curiosity, challenge. James has built not just the technology empire, the president continued, but a model for ethical leadership and community investment. His company, Reynolds Tech Solutions, has revolutionized. Emily stopped hearing words. Reynolds Tech Solutions. The same company Crawford Financial had been negotiating with for months. The same partnership her team had been desperately trying to secure. And she'd been ordering him around like hired help, complaining about her problems, revealing her worst qualities while thinking he had no power, no status, no importance. The confrontation. Emily barely remembered the rest of the gala. She applauded automatically, smiled mechanically, made excuses to leave early. James had disappeared after his brief remarks, but she knew where he'd be. The black sedan sat in the parking garage, engine running. James stood beside it, still in his tuxedo, but, with his bow tie loosened, looking exactly like what he was, a billionaire who'd been playing a role. Emily approached slowly, her heels echoing in the concrete space. They faced each other across 3 feet that felt like miles. So, Emily said, her voice tight with controlled emotion, this is who you really are. Yes, James replied simply. You let me believe you were my driver. Each word came out sharp, precise. You let me order you around. You listened to me complain about my life, my problems, my former assistant, and you said nothing. I said a great deal, James countered gently. You just weren't listening for it. That's not fair. Emily's voice rose, echoing off concrete pillars. You lied to me. I never lied once. James's calm was infuriating. You made an assumption the moment you saw me standing beside a car. I simply didn't correct it. Why? Emily demanded. What kind of game was this? Some rich person's entertainment. Did you laugh about me with your friends? The clueless executive who didn't recognize a billionaire when he opened her door. James's expression softened. I never laughed. Not once. Then why? Emily's anger cracked, revealing hurt underneath. Why would you do this? James took a careful step closer. Because Crawford Financial proposed a major partnership with my company, because my board was pushing me to accept based purely on financial projections, because Robert, my partner, mentioned in passing that you were brilliant with numbers, but ruthless with people, and because I've learned that how someone treats a person they think is powerless tells me everything I need to know about their character. The words landed like physical blows. Emily wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold, despite the mild evening. So this was a test, she said flatly. I was an experiment. You were a question, James corrected. And over 5 days, you started giving me an answer I didn't expect. What answer? Emily's voice was barely a whisper. That you're not who you've convinced yourself you are. James's voice carried no judgment, only certainty. The woman who dismissed me on Monday would have ignored that stranded motorist. The woman who ordered me around on Tuesday would have turned away from that homeless veteran. The woman your former assistant described would never have bought coffee for her driver or asked about his life. I didn't know it mattered. Emily said quietly. Exactly. James let the words settle between them. You treated me with basic human decency, even when you thought I had nothing to offer you. That's rare in my world, Emily. Most people are kind when they want something. You were kind when you thought kindness had no return on investment. Emily felt tears threatening and forced them back. I wasn't that kind. Not really. I made assumptions. I probably said things you were sharp sometimes, James acknowledged. Impatient. Focused on your schedule. But you never demeaned me. You thanked me. You asked questions. And every evening, I watched you soften a little more. Saw you starting to question the walls you've built. How dare you analyze me like some Emily started, anger flaring again. Some what? James challenged. Some investment opportunity. Some business decision. That's how you've been taught to see people, Emily. As assets or liabilities. I wanted to know if something else lived underneath that. The choice silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sounds of the gala still continuing above them. Emily felt stripped bare, exposed in ways that had nothing to do with her elegant gown. What happens now? She asked finally. James's expression remained unreadable. Now I give you the same thing you gave me a choice. We can pretend the past 5 days never happened. You return to seeing me as James Reynolds, billionaire tech founder, someone worth impressing. We proceed with the business partnership based purely on financial merit, or, Emily prompted, or we acknowledge that something real happened in those drives. That you started asking questions about yourself that needed asking. That maybe both of us learned something about who we want to be versus who we've become. Emily looked away, unable to hold his steady gaze. I feel foolish. Growth usually feels that way at first. You don't get to be wise at me right now, Emily said, but without heat. You just upended my entire world. Your world was already upside down, James replied. I just helped you see it clearly. Emily walked to the concrete wall, pressing her palms against the cold surface. Behind her, she heard James's quiet breathing, patient as always. She thought about Diane's resignation letter, about the veteran at the stoplight, about 100 small moments when she'd chosen efficiency over empathy. The business partnership, she said, without turning around. Is that off the table now? That depends on what, on whether you're asking because you're worried about your career, or because you're ready to do business differently. Emily turned back to face him. Can't it be both? For the first time, James smiled. Now that's an honest answer. She moved closer, closing the distance between them. I don't know what I'm ready for, but I know I've been someone I'm not proud of. I know I've hurt people because I stopped seeing them as people, and I know that over the past 5 days, something shifted. What shifted? James asked. You made me want to be better, Emily said simply. Not to impress you, not for business, just better. James studied her for a long moment. Then maybe we start there. Not as driver and passenger. Not as CEO and potential partner. Just as two people trying to figure out what it means to live with integrity. Emily felt something loosen in her chest, fear perhaps. Or the exhausting weight of pretending. I don't know how to do that. Neither do I, James admitted, but I'm willing to learn, if you are. He extended his hand, not in a business gesture, but in genuine offering. Emily looked at it, remembering all the times he'd opened doors for her, all the small kindnesses she'd barely noticed. Slowly, she reached out and took it. Their hands clasped, warm and real, in the cold garage. Above them, the gala continued with its performance of generosity. Below, in the shadows and echoes, two people stood at the beginning of something neither could fully name. Not quite friendship, not quite partnership, but something honest and raw and real. What happens now? Emily asked again. James squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. Now you decide who you want to become. And I decide whether the woman I saw emerging over 5 evenings was real or just a temporary performance. That's not fair, Emily protested. You don't get to test me again. Life tests us every day, James replied. I'm just making the terms visible. He opened the car door, but this time gestured to the driver's seat. Emily looked at him questioningly. Your turn to drive, James said. Literally and metaphorically. Show me who Emily Carter becomes when she realizes the world is watching. Emily stood frozen for a moment, then laughed a real laugh, surprised and genuine. You're impossible, I'm honest, James corrected. There's a difference. As Emily slid behind the wheel, feeling the unfamiliar weight of control, James settled into the passenger seat, where she'd spent 5 transformative evenings. Where to? Emily asked. Wherever you need to go, James replied. Just drive carefully. The destination matters less than how we get there. Emily pulled out of the garage, hands trembling slightly on the wheel, carrying them both toward an uncertain future that somehow felt more real than anything she'd experienced in years. The morning after Emily woke Saturday morning with a headache that had nothing to do with wine. She lay in bed, staring at her ceiling, replaying the previous night, frame by frame. The revelation, the confrontation, the way James had challenged everything she believed about herself. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Coffee at Pike Place Market. 9 a.m., no drivers, no rolls. Just conversation. Emily's finger hovered over the keyboard. Every professional instinct screamed that she should decline, create distance, reassert control over a situation that had spiraled beyond her management. Instead, she typed, I'll be there. Pike Place Market on Saturday morning was Chaostrist's vendors, the famous fish throwers performing for crowds. Emily found James at a small coffee stand, wearing jeans and a simple sweater. Looking nothing like the tuxedoed executive from last night, or the patient driver from the week before. Just a man with kind eyes and an impossible challenge. You came, he said, handing her a cup. Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you might need time to be angry. Emily accepted the coffee. Oh, I'm still angry. But I'm also curious what happens next. They walked through the market, weaving between flower vendors and craft stalls. The normality of it felt surreal after the week's emotional intensity. Tell me about Diane, James said suddenly. Emily nearly stopped walking. My former assistant. Why? Because you mentioned her several times, because her departure hurt you more than you admitted, because I think she matters to this story. Emily was quiet for a long moment, watching a vendor arrange tulips in vibrant bundles. Diane was excellent at her job, organized, efficient, anticipating needs before I knew I had them. I thought we had a good working relationship, but she quit via email at midnight, saying she couldn't sacrifice her mental health for my career anymore. Emily's voice dropped. She said I'd forgotten she was human, that every interaction was a transaction, that she felt like a very expensive, very disposable tool. Were those fair observations? Emily met his eyes. Brutally fair. I paid her well, but never asked about her life. I demanded she be available constantly, but never considered what that cost her. When she made a mistake, I corrected her publicly. When she succeeded, I barely noticed because excellence was simply expected. Why did you treat her that way? Because that's how I was treated climbing the ladder, Emily said. Because in finance, weakness gets exploited. Because I thought if I could survive it, anyone could. James stopped at a flower stall and purchased a single sunflower, handing it to a surprised Emily. Survival and thriving aren't the same thing. You survived a toxic system by becoming part of it. Diane refused to do the same. Emily looked at the bright flower in her hands. I should apologize to her. You should, James agreed, but only if you mean it. Only if something's actually changed. The community center, the following Tuesday. James sent Emily an address with a simple message. If you want to understand what I actually do with my money, come here Thursday evening. The address led to a community center in a working-class neighborhood far from the glass towers of downtown. Emily almost turned back 3 times during the drive. What was she doing? Following a billionaire's cryptic invitations like some kind of lost pilgrim. But she parked and went inside. The center was busy with quiet purpose volunteers sorting donated clothes. A cooking class in one room, a job skills workshop in another. James stood at a table helping an elderly woman fill out paperwork, his full attention focused on her confusion about a form. He looked up as Emily entered, smiled briefly, then returned to Mrs. Chun's paperwork. Emily stood awkwardly near the door until a young volunteer approached. First time here. We can always use extra hands in the food pantry if you're willing. Emily looked down at her designer work clothes, completely inappropriate for manual labor. I'm not really dressed for. We have aprons, the volunteer said cheerfully, already leading her toward the back. For 3 hours, Emily sorted canned goods, packed boxes, and carried supplies. Her back ached. Her carefully styled hair fell loose. She broke a nail opening a stubborn carton. And slowly, something inside her began to thaw. The people who came through weren't statistics or problems, they were individuals with stories. Marcus, who'd lost his job when his factory closed. Teresa, raising 3 grandchildren on a fixed income. David, a veteran struggling with medical bills. Each person carried dignity despite their circumstances, and each volunteer treated them with genuine respect. When the evening ended, Emily found James cleaning tables alongside other volunteers. You didn't tell me you'd be working, she said. What did you expect? That I'd just write checks and let others do the actual work. Emily flushed. That's exactly what I expected. That's what I do. James handed her a spray bottle and cloth. Then maybe it's time to change that. They cleaned in silence for a while before Emily spoke again. Why do you do this? You could pay people to run this center. You could donate from a distance. Because money without connection is just noise, James replied. These people don't need my money as much as they need to be seen, to be valued, to know they matter to their community. I can give that. And what do you get? Emily asked. James looked at her directly. Perspective, purpose. A reminder that my worth isn't measured by my bank account. The knowledge that I'm building something that matters beyond quarterly profits. Emily felt something crack open inside her chest. I've spent 15 years building a career. I have money, influence, respect in my industry, and I'm not sure any of it actually matters. Does it feel like it matters? It feels empty, Emily admitted quietly, like I've been climbing a ladder only to realize it's leaning against the wrong wall. James set down his cleaning supplies and faced her fully. Then move the ladder. You're not too far gone to change direction. Part 2 is on the way.